Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, as I've supported men in their love and work lives for 15 years now, many men ask for the right words to say to be more successful, attractive, and desirable. But I found it's not so simple as giving scripts or lines because every man is different. So giving words or scripts would be like giving a tall, thin man a shorter, wider man's pants, or vice versa. The words have to make sense for you and your personality, and there's so much happening beneath the surface that people are responding to. If you're interested in how to become a better lover and leader in your own unique way, go to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz, or you can text ALIVE to 44144. It only takes a couple minutes and you'll start to get an idea of how you can be both more respected and desired. After you fill it out, we can schedule a time to review your quiz and talk about your specific challenges and desires. So again, go to either shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text ALIVE to 44144. That's ALIVE to 44144. Enjoy this episode of Man Alive. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm here today with Jordan Gray. Welcome, Jordan.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited you're here too. We are going to talk about sexual shame, and in particular, focusing on how you can have relief from sexual shame, how you can move through it. We've both agreed that there's no perfect 100%, I can be relieved of this in every moment forever. But there are ways to feel much freer, much more loving toward yourself, compassionate toward yourself, connected with your partner, and to really, get to have incredible love and sex and affection and intimacy by moving through that shame as opposed to getting stuck in it.
100%.
Good. So let me do a quick intro and then we'll dive in. Jordan is a personal development author and sex and relationship coach with nearly a decade of practice behind him. His work has been featured in the Huffington Post, the New York Times, BBC, Self, Psychology Today, Business Insider, Yahoo, Forbes, Elephant Journal. You've been everywhere.
I've been busy.
And countless other publications around the globe. And really, he's made it his life's mission to make thriving relationships attainable to everyone. And within 2 years of starting his website, Jordan had 5 #1 best-selling ebooks. I highly recommend checking those out on Amazon. And since launching, has reached an engaged audience of over 20 million people from around the world with his writing. So as we start, I just want to thank you, for doing this work and for making it accessible and attainable to people. I believe that relationship is one of the hardest things we can do. I was just looking to see if I could find actually my my email quote at the bottom of my email. I think I have it right here. Is a Rilke quote that's, "For one human being to love another, that is perhaps the most difficult of all our tasks. The ultimate, the last test and proof, the work for which all other work is but preparation." So, it feels true. It's like this is not easy.
Completely. Yeah, I so agree that I think some of the most potent mirrors that we can have in our entire lives are being self-employed and being in any intimate relationship. Like these things, they're just constant mirrors to us of highlighting, hey, here's where you need to grow next. And it's not easy. It's worth it, but you definitely get dragged through the trenches in it.
Yes, I agree. And maybe I'll start off by saying, I had a really beautiful client session yesterday with a man around sexual shame. And part of what we did was, I just made space for him to really talk about and say to me, and I think there's a particular dynamic with me being a woman, but I think it could happen, in any coaching relationship or even any partnered relationship. Where he just got to say some of the things he'd been holding as shameful. And, Brene Brown and others who've done work on shame, we know that shame really thrives in secrecy and kind of in the shadows. And once it comes out, there's a lot of relief. I mean, he emailed me today and just said, "Oh my God, I feel so much lighter. I feel so much freer. I'm not holding on to this in the same way I had been for 20, 30 years. And I've seen that with men, decades of feeling wrong and bad and this weight. So yeah, let's talk about that. I was going to say, what are some of the things that you do with men around sexual shame? Maybe we should even just go into a little bit. How would a man know, if he's feeling sexually ashamed? For some men, it might be really obvious, right? I think about having sex with a woman or a man, or I use porn, whatever, and I feel this bad feeling inside. For other men, they may not recognize that shame would be the root of it.
For sure. Yeah. It's one of those things where any number of symptoms can bubble up. I'd say some of the most persistent ones are debilitating anxiety. If even this is one of those like kind of conditioned stimulus responses of, if you get an erection and your mind immediately goes into this underlying, even subtle sense of dread or impending danger is coming, you should freak out. Like that old saying of, synapses that fire together, wire together. It's a very real thing that can happen, that sexual arousal with anxiety just becomes so intertwined that we wouldn't even know.
As one.
Exactly. We wouldn't even know to label that as, there might be some embedded toxic shame that's really married itself to my sexual arousal response.
Yes.
And I think very similar to how you don't know how good your mind and body can feel if you've lived your entire life living, eating the worst possible food. When you start eating healthy, you're like, I can have energy like this. I can have this clear of a mind. It's very similar to how sick a lot of people's relationship, or a lot of society's relationship, is to our bodies and is to sexuality. That there's so many forces at stake keeping us separated from our pain, separated from our secrets. In the addiction traditions, there's that expression, you're only as sick as your secrets. And you saw that with your client, and I'm sure you have many times over, that by alleviating this truth and letting something out they've been holding on to, that their ego has just been so tightly grasping. It's that whole, if I face this thing, if I really even, let alone say it to someone else externally, but if I even faced it, then it'll ruin me. Then I'll really be confirmed as unlovable or broken or faulty or not enough.
Right. If you really knew this about me, there's no way
you'd sprint. You'd run for the hills and never come back. And this would reaffirm my brokenness. And then I would be that much less likely to bring myself sexually to anyone else in the future, because I knew it. My ego's confirmed, and this is a dangerous thing. Don't show yourself to people.
Yes, right. The other thing we were talking about, or I've talked about this with other clients as well, was like how far back the shame can have an impact. Like that sometimes men are afraid to even talk to someone they're attracted to, or go online, date, do any of those things. And they don't necessarily realize, but then sometimes it comes out in conversation. Part of that fear is, if I say hi, if I go on a date, eventually it's going to lead to this sexual experience that I'm already ashamed of. I'm going to have to say these things or admit these things or say that.
Or disappoint them.
Right. Or disappoint them. Or, I am now in my 40s instead of in my 20s, and I don't always get an erection, the first couple times I'm with a woman, because I don't feel as safe, or it's harder for me to get an erection in general. Right. Like all these things can then have an impact all the way back in the, hi, how's your day going? Right. Or hi, it's nice to meet you.
Totally. Yeah. And this is one of the biggest pieces of what really underlines not just sexual shame, but shame in general, is, shame is really rooted in self-rejection. So if you're already rejecting yourself on multiple levels, then, coming back to the person who's afraid to initiate or, show any kind of interest in a potential partner, not just because, I might disappoint them in bed, so why bother? But there's also the level of self-rejection of, what if I'm not good enough for them? What if, what if they reject me in a way that I'm already rejecting myself, and then just pokes the wound, stabs the wound even harder. And then I go, what, never mind, I'll just play small my entire life.
Right. Or I'll just be single and I'll just hang out. Right. Whatever small is, it might be single. It might
lock my heart in a box and let no one see it forever.
Yeah. And I find it bleeds over into the realm of career and all of that as well. Right. I'm not going to take these risks
Absolutely.
For the same reason.
Totally. Yeah. A lot of it. Whether you label those self-rejection or worthiness issues or whatever it is, it really comes down to that same piece. Yeah. And there's definitely something to be said about how how we show up in bed is a microcosm for our entire lives. So
Mm-hmm.
of course, if you're timid or anxious or held back or shame-based in your sex life, then it absolutely bleeds into your career life, and not just career life, but every major facet.
Everything.
How you treat your body, the kind of food you put into your mouth, how open and loving, compassionate, and emotionally available you are for your friendships. Like it's everything. It's all, it bleeds over into every pillar.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was just thinking back to another client years ago where, he admitted something to me, and, for confidentiality, I'm not going to say exactly what it was, but it was then the idea that he came up with after he admitted what had happened to him when he was young, right? So he was like, somewhere between 3 and 7 years old. And then he walked away with this idea that he was perverted. And we had this moment, and it was just amazing to see how quickly sometimes the shame can actually unravel, where he said, then I always felt perverted after that. And I said, you say that like it's a bad thing. Like, oh, there's something bad about being perverted, and he just burst into laughter. And it was like that moment where it just shifted, where all of a sudden he was like, oh, I don't have to actually even judge being perverted as wrong. There are perversion can be beautiful, right? It's just, we all have these desires. It's one of the things I love working with men is like, sexual desires, whatever they are okay. And if you move forward in a consensual way, right, that's a completely different experience than if you're going and taking advantage or abusing. But, to go back to whatever's in your mind or your body that shows up as a desire or a pleasure, right? It to me, I see it as, for the most part, right? We could go out to the extremes, but for the most part, I just see it as innately good because that's what's there. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. If it's there and it's in your body, then it's right. And again, with sex, with career, it's all the same stuff. And, really I love that anecdote because as I see it, the focal point of the antithesis of self-rejection is self-acceptance. So this sword they'd been using to hit himself with forever is like, oh, this is actually a tool that I can use and love and accept, and this isn't bad or broken. And Ken Page talks really beautifully about the concept of our core gifts, and our core gifts are always surrounded by our core wounds, because this thing that is so big and beautiful and lovable about us, it was understandably the thing that attracted the most invalidation, because it was such a big piece of us. And so there's who we actually are in the middle, and there's who we fear we are surrounding that. And that's what the shame is like, oh, what if the fact that I'm sensitive or kinky, or that I care deeply about people, these things that have been made wrong, usually in my early childhood. What if these things are not only not burdens or mistakes or disgusting, but the most lovable pieces about me?
Exactly.
And totally worthwhile and valid.
Yeah. I love that. It makes me want to just kind of pause there, right? It's like, right. Imagine, you listening, imagine that thing that you've held your whole life as something's wrong. The worst part about you, that actually that could be the thing. I was not the thing that makes you the most lovable, right? Because you just are lovable innately.
All your parts lovable, yeah.
But right, but it's like, wow, what if that unique thing, actually was the thing that had you able to connect with someone else and share this deep love and intimacy. And, as you're loving that part of yourself, you're free to go out in the world and have the impact you want to have and create everything. Like, just imagine that for a moment. Yeah.
And an offshoot of that is, the concept of whatever you're selling is someone is looking to buy. Like, I think that's another fear, whether, to go into like a relatively more superficial piece, it's not just sexual desires, but also your physical appearance. I know women that like adore men with big noses, and other men that love guys or other men that love women with, big thighs and calves. Like whatever the thing is that you're like, oh, this is like the worst part about me that I have to like shape and mold and, again, perpetuate that state of self-rejection. When you really own whatever the thing is, whether internal or external or desire-based, whatever, you go, no, this is actually totally lovable. Like as soon as you shift your relationship to that, it's that whole idea of, the script in your mind precedes the actors you attract to fill that script. when you say, you know what, this part is fine, that's when from that day forward, you only attract people that also confirm that story that, yes, that thing about you is so sexy. And I love that we have this compatibility that you used to reject and now no longer.
Yes. Well, and that part's huge. I want to underscore that. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about that, because sometimes it can seem like magic, but you know, the reality is right. But the reality is, like, when you start holding it differently, and instead of bringing it out there, something like, well, I have to tell you this thing, and you know, I'm sorry, kind of apologizing for it, and there's this thing that's wrong with me. You know, you put that in the other person's head. Like, what is this awful, horrible thing, right? You kind of create this idea. It's so different. And, you know, I've worked with couples too, where, or, you know, single people dating and whatever. It's so different than hearing someone say, you know, there's this thing about me that I feel sometimes self-conscious about, or I'm vulnerable. But there's also this recognition that, you know, I'm a good person and this doesn't make me bad or wrong. And, you know, it's like, then there's a way that you can hold it together, I think, or you can kind of both look at it together and be on the same team and kind of try to love it together, versus you're like dumping it in this other person's lap and just like, I can't handle it. You know, you take it and, you know, just, get it away from me or something. There's just, it's such a different energy to it.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. The latter being still a place of self-rejection of like, hey, you handle this awful, messy part of me that I can barely even hold in my consciousness for a minute, versus, hey, here's this thing that I haven't gotten to 100% self-love on, which is fine. You know, I think that it's a bit over-functiony or, you know, mildly narcissistic to think that we can heal our own wounds 100% just on our own. Like, you know, if a wound is created in relationship, it has to be healed in relationship. That's just unequivocal fact.
I believe that too.
I believe in, you know, getting up to like your 70% level of healing and do what you can with journaling and, you know, close, trusted, non-shaming friends and therapists and coaches. And at a certain point, there will still be some residue that can only be healed by like the closest people in your life, namely intimate relationship, which is fine. It's not a personal failing. And that's one thing that I do disagree with in the kind of general, you know, lowest common denominator self-help industry, is that idea of like, no one will love you until you love yourself perfectly. It's like, oh great, 100%. Another thing to beat myself up with. Like, it's not sustainable or real.
Yeah, I was thinking at some point after I was divorced, you know, almost 5 years ago, I think, and there was a part of me that was like, I can't get back into a relationship until I handle the part of me that, you know, can lose myself and not fully be here, or not be totally conscious of my needs and my desires in partnership. And, you know, and then I start to realize, how am I going to practice actually staying connected to myself while I'm alone? Like, how am I going to practice doing that in relationship unless I'm in a relationship? You know, it's uncomfortable, but it's kind of the only way to actually get that real-time practice.
Totally. Yeah. And there's absolutely something to be said about the growth edge of, you know, cultivating your relationship to yourself and being in your power and really being, you know, healthy, selfish, and doing a lot for yourself while single. And like you said, there's only so much flight time you can experience before it's like, okay, you know, when you're single, there's some element of like, school's out. You know, it's not really like the harder stuff. There are lessons we learned while being single, but doing those same things, you know, making time for yourself and prioritizing your health and your needs while also, you know, being a parent, and then managing the emotional needs of, you know, by managing it, I mean like taking on completely, but, you know, being emotionally available for a partner as well. Of course, it's more to juggle.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot, I think, about, you know, the shift from self-rejection to self-acceptance. How do you, you know, when a man comes to you and expresses whatever kind of sexual shame, whether it's that anxiety or erectile dysfunction or, you know, anything else that's happening, do you have specific ways that you actually work with men to relieve or release that shame?
Yeah, absolutely. The first piece is always getting to a place of truth or ownership. Either way of labeling it works. That, it's not uncommon for my male and female clients to need some amount of prodding to really take ownership of the words they're saying, because they'll dance around it a little bit, which, you know, there's some kind of self-selection bias of them being more open than the average person because, you know, they're in a session, they're paying for it. Exactly. They've,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they've allowed themselves to kind of erode enough of their ego to say, I'm here to learn, and I'm making myself vulnerable to someone that I might be meeting for the first time. But yeah, there's still some like, yeah, there's just been like some difficulties over the last little bit, and like it's getting in the way of this and this. I'm like, cool. So until you can like name it directly, and for context, like I've been through probably every single thing you've been through, whether it's performance anxiety, erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, sexual shame, fear of emotional intimacy. Like, you know, I'm on this path for a reason.
Right.
Bring it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, there's some prodding into like really taking ownership of what the thing is and naming it. So it's less of this, you know, demon lurking in the, you know, the unexplored rooms of our mind, but just being like, hey, here's this thing that I've made into a monster.
Right.
And yeah, so the first part is ownership.
And okay, and I just want to clarify ownership for people who don't necessarily know what that means too.
Sure.
Like the ownership of being able to say, for example, instead of, you said dancing around it, like giving the example of, you know, it's hard for me to get an erection when I'm with whatever it is. Like, you know, these days it's hard for me to get an erection unless I feel safe with a woman or something like that. But that dancing around it might look like, well, I don't know, I'm having a hard time. Or can you say what the difference you see is?
Yeah, exactly. It really comes down to naming the thing directly or things directly. And, you know, I'm doing this not to like embarrass the client or put them on the spot, but because I know that I'm a training ground for how they speak to their partner.
Exactly.
So I let them get away with it, then they'll bring their 30% self to their partner, and they'll 30% heal it at best.
Yes.
So yeah, that's the ownership piece, is just about naming directly. You know, don't make it such a monster in your head that, like Voldemort, for my Harry Potter fans in the house, that, you know, he who shall not be named, like name it, like
name
tell me
it
exactly what's happening for you.
Right.
I'm safe. I've been through it. Like, what's happening? You can, there's nothing, you know, don't let the words or the concepts or the symptomatic reality of what you're experiencing have so much power that you can't name it.
Right. And I don't know, I was going to say, I don't know if you see this as the next piece, maybe this is where you're going, but for me, when I'm working with people in that way, there's the being willing to name it. And then there's like, all right, now let's be with whatever feelings arise or whatever, you know, somatic experiences arise. And instead of it just being a theoretical or, you know, intellectual naming, it's like, oh, let's see what's actually here now to be healed.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's enough of an emotional charge around whatever that thing is. That's what's really keeping them stuck in it. Is exactly, it's not just the concept of self-rejection, but like, okay, now that you've told any other person what you're experiencing, again, whether it's me or your partner or whoever it is in the moment, what then comes up is that now that I've named this thing about me, you have, you know, proof, positive evidence that I am unlovable or broken or unwhole, and like you now have reason to reject me. You know, there's some core wound tied to it that, well, you know, who gave you this limited of a bandwidth of allowing you to be lovable? Who told you that we're broken or damaged? Or, you know, whether it's, you know, an overt trauma like rape or sexual assault or being molested when you're young, or as comparatively covert as, you know, maybe one time when you were 22 with one of your earlier sexual partners, you came a bit too, you know, you came faster than you wanted to, and you think you saw a really disapproving look on your partner's face, and then you went, I'm a disappointment to women sexually, and then just like made that your core story for the next decade and a half.
Right. And it's amazing how fast that can happen in those little disapproving looks or the tone or the something, and then we can have that complete,
whether they're real or imagined.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's, again, with the script precedes the actor thing. That's because there already was enough of a shred of that in our mind that was like looking for evidence of, oh, I knew it.
Yep. Great. Okay, so we've got the ownership piece, the, you know, speaking the truth of it, the being willing to feel the emotions and all of that comes with it. That's not just the thoughts about it. And what else?
Yeah. So after that, there's kind of the insight, and then there's the action level. So the insight piece is, feel what feelings come up, address what the kind of origin story of why those feelings are there. You know, what was the earliest time you can remember this feeling coming up for you? Again, it's not at all uncommon for it to either be like a 4 to 8 year old early childhood memory or an early sexual experience memory 16 to 22, 25. Really naming that, not to then, as Brene Brown talks about with the, you go through the swamplands of your shame, not to like set up a tent and live there,
right?
to be aware of it and go, got it. This could be where a lot of the toxic shame is originating from. Cool. Good to know.
Yeah.
But the insight piece is one thing, and it's good to, again, if there is a big emotional charge around that, which some people definitely have, then I see there being a benefit to just sitting in that for a few minutes, and whether that looks like allowing yourself to really feel the frustration or sadness or grieving a certain chunk of your life, or doing intentional like anger processing. Some people have anger about the fact that something happened to them once, or maybe nothing overt happened to them, but they've been carrying this thing for a decade and a half, and they're angry or sad about that sense of self-abandonment of like, how long have I crippled myself by holding on to this story, and how much of a jerk I've been to me.
And I love you said it, training ground, because I find that's what it, like, sometimes the way I talk about my coaching is it's human practice, right? And if you can do it with me, if you can sit here and grieve with me and, watch me watching you, right? Like we're having this loop is happening where something's getting healed because you're willing to be seen in that grief and be loved there. And then it heals such that the next time you go to your partner or to someone you are just starting to date or asking out or something, and you start to feel a similar emotion, whether it's anxiety or fear or grief or any of that, it's much more familiar, and you can tolerate it. You can be like, oh, here's this feeling, rather than, oh shit, like the feeling grabs you by the ankles and, pulls you on your face out of the room or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you said grabbed you by the ankles, I immediately pictured it like being pulled upside down and like shaken out for his lunch money. I was like,
wow, did that happen to you when you were younger?
No, I was always the tallest person in class, so no one could physically pick me up in that way. It can just hold on to us for that long.
Yeah.
There's something you said I wanted to comment on. You're talking about, I lost that. I had a good thought that I liked. All right.
Something we're talking about, I saw, you guys can't see because you're listening on audio, but I saw your eyebrows go up a little bit when I said something about the training or the human practice.
Yeah, boom, nailed it. So exactly, it's this sense of progressive desensitization that's kind of, the two main ways that anything is healed psychologically, either through flooding or progressive desensitization, which is just a fancy way of saying baby steps.
Mm-hmm.
You do the thing that on a scale of 0 to 10 is 4 or 5 out of 10 anxiety producing, as opposed to starting with, oh, you're afraid of this thing, well then launch into it right now and like sit in it for days, versus, okay, well, what does it look like? If it makes you nervous to admit that something has happened to you or that you experience some symptom, name it with a safe, trusted, non-shaming person, and then watch your world not crumble. Watch their face not hate you or find you disgusting. Like, the ego will be scanning vigilantly for that feedback of, oh, I've said this thing, what's going to happen now? And then not getting the feedback that it fears getting, and be like, okay, maybe I can be kind of safe with some people sometimes when I alleviate this thing. And then, that's enough confirmation, for every unit of courage we deploy, we get the same amount of confidence back.
I like that.
By having done that, you go, okay, I feel 4% more confident in this. Now I can take the next step because I have that much more bandwidth inside of me. And taking that to your partner, generally several times over, because most, the vast majority of wounds are not going to be healed in one laying on your side, talking to your partner conversation in bed. Right. It can take, weeks, months, or years for certain things to really get to a place of emotional neutrality. Whereas, if it 100% owned you last year, then it can get, I don't believe that we can heal things to like 0% necessarily, but when it gets down to 10% or 5%, where it's such a negligible emotional charge that you're like, this really doesn't own me at all. Like, sure, if I like make myself sit in it and really ruminate on it, I can probably make myself tear up, but it's,
Right, but it's not, again, it doesn't kind of have you by the balls in that way, or.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was just thinking back to a personal experience of being in a relationship. And I think I'm saying this because I want to say, like, so many things we think, oh my God, that's the one thing I could not say. And I was in a relationship for a little while where the man admitted to me that I wasn't his physical type. And he wasn't actually, like, we had great chemistry. I didn't actually know this before, that chemistry and attraction could be separate.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, I'm not actually attracted to you in that way. Like, you're not my type. And at first for me, that's like one of the biggest fears I think I used to have in my life, was like somebody wouldn't be attracted to me or wouldn't want me for my body or any of those things. I'm not beautiful enough. But it was really interesting in that it gave me an opportunity to find my own love for myself and my own kind of sense of like, oh, okay, well, that's you over there. That's me over here. So I just want to say, like, the unexpected can happen too. And I've been involved in communities for, 2 decades now, where we practice speaking the truth and then sticking around for the messy, uncomfortable aftermath of it and actually staying connected. And, while I do believe there's an art, and I work with that, and I'm sure you do too, right? The art of communication, the art of saying something so that someone's less likely to run for the hills and more likely to feel connected to you. I think the majority of the population stops much sooner than, what we can actually say to our partners and end up feeling closer.
Absolutely. Yeah, I resonate with so much of that. And I'm in identical communities where, yes, you can be, compassionate and considerate and be fully in your truth. You don't have to be like overtly cruel because, oh, well, this is my truth. And so fuck you. Here
you're fucking ugly.
Yeah. Yeah. My personal feeling is that you're a hideous person. Oh, wow. That's big curveball there.
No. Nope.
Yeah. And, there's something to be said about how I've had clients that have been in that exact situation where their partner, I was working with a couple, and one of them said, this person isn't my like usual type or ideal type or exactly what I go for. And we still have amazing sex. And I still find myself very chemically, like, we have great chemistry. And it isn't so obvious to me that the person hearing that feedback, it's not on them to say, well, the most honoring thing that I could do is find someone who's like super jazzed on me. Right. Because I see that as more of a point of pride than self-honoring. Because if you do still have connection, you do love your conversations and do have amazing chemistry, there's something to be said about there being maybe just a recalibration period of that person being like, oh, I've only ever gone for this hair color and you're you're a deviation from my norm. It's like, yes, cool. I love myself and I find myself attractive enough that I'm fine being a deviation from your norm. If we're both voting ourselves in this relationship, that can continue to be a thing, even though I don't fit your normal script of what a partner has been for you.
Right. And ultimately, how amazing is it to actually be our own validation rather than going out there looking for it?
Exactly.
Which creates all kinds of problems. Yeah. So, okay. Most of our problems. Exactly. Yeah.
Give me the love I'm not giving myself. Something outside of me.
Yeah.
Money, status, partners, parents, etc.
Yeah. Any other ways you want to either suggest that men work with their shame? I'm kind of thinking too, if there's anything else on my mind, or any other ways you particularly work with shame?
Yeah, definitely. So 2 main tools I want to touch on. We've largely been working on the kind of psychological, emotional relationship to shame. 2 things. One, as just a general ownership exercise. I love this. I don't have like a flashy name for it, but basically how to figure out and / brainstorm your ideal sex life, where this is one of those things where I think, I remember I had one client when I prescribed this to him, he said that a couple minutes into it, it felt like he had been, like a impoverished kid whose family couldn't really ever afford to have Christmas, who was like afraid to ask for anything because his life had been such a like sexually scarce kind of landscape. And when I prescribed this exercise, he was like, oh, I felt like a greedy rich kid who was like, I want like a pony and another pony in this color and like 18 and bicycles. Unicorn.
Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, really sitting down with 1 to 3 pages of physical paper or a long text document, as we are in an increasingly digital age, and really getting into a granular conversation about what your ideal sex life looks like in terms of frequency and duration and partner or partners, the emotional tone, the emotional content of what you're engaging in, outfits and what the room smells like and fabrics, like just getting into everything, like what really registers as pleasure to me, and be as absolutely selfish as possible and just make it your thing, and not what can I ask for within what I've experienced or what's reasonable. Be unreasonable.
Unreasonable. I love this. I love this especially for men. I mean, this may totally stand true for women and just people in general too, but I do find that a lot of men, especially with big hearts, and, kind, caring, loving, generous men, can leave themselves out of the picture of like, okay, if I please her or I please my partner, then things will be good. But then they're not actually receiving, and they don't necessarily even know what they want. And, then it devolves into this, sex becomes unsatisfying, and there's resentment and frustration.
Yeah.
And a sense of like, well, what I want isn't even possible, before really even knowing what it is you want.
Totally. Yeah. And this ties into Dr. Robert Glover talks about nice guy syndrome. And one of the most embedded pieces of that psychology is really, if I do things flawlessly for others, all of my needs will be met without me ever having to speak them.
Yes.
Which, no one is a mind reader. This is impossible. That's like one of the biggest core components of any adult relationship is you say, you take responsibility for your needs and say, hey, sometimes I do just want to put my head on your lap and have you like pet my hair and tell me you love me.
Yes.
Or sometimes I want to 69 with you for 2 hours because that's my favorite thing in the world. Like whatever it is. They won't know it unless you name it directly. Yeah. And just because you didn't name it directly doesn't mean that you will get that thing in that moment, without hesitation. They're still their own person. They opt their way into whatever you're doing. But yeah, that's definitely, there needs to be way less mind reading in people's bedrooms.
Right.
Attempted mind reading.
Right. Another thing I often suggest to men is just to ask, what do you like, going the other way, because there's often the sense of, well, you're supposed to then be a mind reader yourself. You're supposed to know what a woman wants, or again, man, I'm not saying, I think a lot of men who listen to this are heterosexual, but I think this can run the gamut. And I think all of this stuff actually can be applied, no matter what gender, sexual desire. But with women in particular, I often say to men, every woman is different. First of all, every one woman is different at different points in her cycle and different days and different moods. And if you ask me what I wanted today, it would be completely different than tomorrow or this morning. Right. And so if you're trying to like, okay, if I just do this, I'll get it right because it was right yesterday, it's just not going to work.
Yeah. Instead of learning how to master a Rubik's Cube that is really unsolvable, just go, just check in. Right. Like, hey, what's happening right now? What are you feeling?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just remind myself of a second thing. So now there's a second and third thing. So tied into that, which is kind of a hybrid between the insight and action thing, is something that I call spoiling session. And a spoiling session is a predetermined amount of time that one partner is basically just like full on selfish mode of you would ask for exactly what you want for, an hour, 2 hours. And if you don't want to set a timer, then have like a playlist of your favorite songs that are roughly that length of time. Mm-hmm. And this works on a couple different levels because you are, teaching or communicating or conditioning your partner to really know what works for you. And the onus is on you to do the usually, especially early days, uncomfortable work of saying what you want moment to moment, because there is, there can be an inherent vulnerability of asking for what you want, whether it's the first time you've done it or whether you've been with someone, been married for decades.
Right. Sometimes it gets even more vulnerable because you've not asked for so long that then you feel even more awkward asking later.
Yeah. Then you might be thinking, they're thinking like, they like that. We haven't done this ever in so many years of being together.
Yeah.
But all the more reason to start that new path and go, this is a thing that I like. And if you could wear, thigh-high socks, that'd be cool, or whatever the ask is. So a spoiling session, I recommend doing those on separate nights. So like one person's night is just that night. It's not like, okay, an hour for you, hour for me, because you can't really sink into and surrender to the same degree versus if, yours is Wednesday and theirs is Friday of the same week.
Yeah.
And again, you're totally allowed to schedule that as well if that's a thing that appeals to you and your schedules.
Mm-hmm.
the last piece on the more embodied kind of action level stuff is in terms of the more physiological symptoms. So, fairly common stuff like premature ejaculation, erectile dysfunction at any age. One thing that I'm a huge fan of is just a general resensitization practice. Because again, society not only encourages us to disconnect from our bodies in so many ways, but with the proliferation of high-speed internet access and pornography, which is also an external condition stimulus that teaches us to it's so common for men, especially born after 1975, 1980, to have literally trained their bodies to, get aroused by something outside of them, have an erection and masturbate to completion within 2 or 3 minutes. Of course you're training your body to be disconnected from your arousal response.
Yes.
So the kind of antithesis, the healthy opposite of that is similar to a sporting session, setting aside a decent chunk of time. I recommend at least 30 to 60 minutes where you just explore your body. And again, this is absolutely gender neutral advice. Whether you use sex toys or not, I recommend as much as possible to keep it very simple. No porn. The point is not to orgasm or to do anything impressive or right or correctly. It's just self-exploration. It's just like resensitizing yourself to just your arousal response, but your body in general. What happens when, I didn't know that I do like my nipples being touched, or the back of my knees is an erogenous zone, even when I touch it myself. You won't know this stuff until you put it in the flight time of...
I love your flight time, right? The simulator and all of this. It's so true, right? Unless you actually have the experience, it's not a theoretical thing. You don't know it.
Totally. Yeah. What are you going to be able to bring to your partner in your spoiling session if you don't know what to ask for?
Right.
That's the first line of defense in knowing what to ask for. Getting in touch with your own body. Again, male, female, engaging in extended, I'm almost even hesitant to call it masturbation, because that makes it sound too genital focused. It's not just genital focused. It's you and your sensual relationship to yourself.
Yeah. And I'm loving that where we are right now is desire and pleasure. And, because I think there are, in my experience working with people, there are the two different doorways, right, that we can go through to heal shame. Some of it is taking these actions and going toward pleasure and seeing what comes up along the way. And some of it is actually going through the door of shame and seeing what's already there. And both are really powerful and effective.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think that everyone has some degree to work through on both, but it usually is more weighted one towards the other, at least in terms of the initial, way into the forest of how, some people need the kind of insight or top-down approach. Other people need the body up.
Yep.
And one is not more correct than the other. It's just different people's paths.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you for having this conversation. And any last thing you want to leave men with, and how can they find you?
My pleasure. This was absolutely fun. And I love that you're on the level. This is a really easy conversation to have. I'm not surprised in the slightest. The easiest way to find me is my website, my major hub, jordangrayconsulting.com. I've got books on Amazon and things on other sites, but that's the main one where all my stuff is.
Central hub. Good.
Exactly. In terms of major topics, I think the last thing I would want to touch on is just this idea that, that whole concept of, give them an inch and they take a mile kind of thing, where I think that it's one of those instances where small hinges can move really big doors. And by putting any degree of thought or care or compassion or intentionality towards this area of your life, I think people are consistently blown away by how much progress they can make with a little bit of effort.
Yes.
And, it might sound intimidating when we talk about, resensitizing yourself to your body or spoiling sessions. Because you've done any piece of this, it doesn't mean that you're now locked into a 2-hour-a-week practice for life. It can really be...
You could do it for 5 minutes, right?
Exactly.
Or you could do it and you could do something and never do it again, or you could do something and change your mind in the middle, or...
Exactly. Yeah. You and your partner could do, or you and your future partner can do a 10-minute spoiling session for each of you and be like, cool, that was it. That was the crash course we did on each other's bodies.
Yeah.
And the, that 0.1% or degree change at that point in time has a positive ripple effect long term.
Yes.
And yeah, of course, if you do it a couple more times in the future, great. It's exponential growth, not just linear growth.
Yeah.
But yeah, if there's any piece of this that has sounded overwhelming or intimidating, or like, oh, that's like a lot of homework, not that having sex with people is like the worst homework you can
right,
prescribe.
Have.
Hey, have more pleasurable sex. Do I have to? But it really is one of those things where a little bit goes a long way. So whatever the tiniest little seed habit or micro chunk that appeals to you, try it out. And there's no pressure to do that in perpetuity. It can just be its own thing, and you and your partner in your sex life will benefit moving forwards.
Awesome. I totally agree. I think in some ways we're kind of, as we talk to each other, we're speaking to the choir in a way, right? Because we were both so aligned. But I totally agree, right? Like take one small step and see how it goes, and then reassess and take a next one and see what actually inspires you and what feels good. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and it gave you something to consider and explore in your life. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to ShaynaJamesCoaching.com/quiz or text the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 to get a sense of how you can become a better lover and leader. You'll start to see how you can be both more respected and desired in your unique and genuine way. If you don't feel as confident or as excited about life or love as you'd like to be, this quiz is a really great starting point and will guide you toward a more passionate love life and a more inspiring and successful career. So again, text ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 or head over to ShaynaJamesCoaching.com/quiz. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.